Board of Education meeting to order. We have 5 board members present in person. Item 2A is adoption of the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. If you would please cast your votes.
Motion passes 5-0.
We will move to item 3A, public comments. Public comments will be allowed with a duration of 3 minutes per speaker to be timed by the board clerk, and speakers must sign up for in-person public comment by 1 p.m. the day of the board meeting. That public comment by email or remote not be accepted. That those giving public comment not approach the board or move past the podium. No handouts will be allowed, but such materials may be emailed in advance to the board clerk for distribution to the board, and that public comment may not include reference to names of specific students and or person engaged in discussion at that time, except to gain clarification. Casey, did we have anyone sign up to address the board?
We do not.
We will move on to item 4A, consent agenda. Items on consent agenda are considered to be routine business and can be handled with a single motion and vote unless a board member would like to remove an item for a separate discussion or consideration. Is there any discussion or would anyone like to make a motion?
Madam Vice President, I'd like to move to adopt the consent agenda.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please cast your votes. Also, thank you, as always, for our generous community donations. We are so appreciative of our community's support of our students in the district.
Motion passes 5-0.
Great. Item 6A is the Kansas Teacher of the Year in summary.
We welcome Mrs. Erica Hugger, K-12 finalist. She was here earlier to talk about the experience that our district provided to the K-12 finalists in the winter, and she's here to talk about her overall experience over the last year.
Oh, thank you. This is a KSDE, the Kansas State Department of Ed program. And the goal of the program is to recognize and utilize secondary and elementary teachers that are exemplary in their field. In addition to that, it is a goal to create a network of Kansas Teacher of the Year finalists over the years that can be utilized for the improvement of schools, student performance, and the teaching profession. So I'm going to start off with who was a part of the Kansas Teacher of the Year team. Brian Skinner up in the top. He is a special education teacher from Newton, and he was the Kansas Teacher of the Year. And the rest of us are finalists or regional teachers of the year. So there's Kendall Norberg, Mallory Keefe, Jessica Gazzano, Pamela Munoz, Jamie Swindler, myself, and Carly Torres. And so the 8 of us made up the Kansas Teacher of the Year team for 2023, which is still happening. You know, 2023 is not over, so we are not done. We have a few remaining events on our agenda for the remainder of our K-12 2023 year. But this is what we have done so far. So we started right away after we were recognized and after Brian was named the Kansas Teacher of the Year at Kansas State University, where we presented our first presentation, 90 minutes, to over 250 future educators from Kansas State University. So that was a big audience for our first presentation. From there, we also went to Capturing Kids' Hearts. We went out to Fort Hays State immediately after that in November, and we presented at a conference there for future educators, which included high school and college students that were interested in education. We presented at Ed Rising a couple times, and that one was at the Mid-America Nazarene at their college. And then we went to Capturing Kids' Hearts, and that was November. And then we got a break in December and picked back up in January. So from January to May, we did everything else. We went to any four-year college with a teacher education program. They all received an invite, and our goal was to promote the teaching profession, inspire them to be teachers, and hopefully speak to a big audience. The great thing about having a team of 8 is that, you know, it's not always possible that we can be at all of these events. So we were paired, and if there was an event that I couldn't go to, like I didn't attend Sterling just because I didn't want to be gone from my classroom that many times that week, then my partner did the presentation. So the entire team or part of the team attended all of these places. In addition to that, we went to 8 school districts. So you got to hear about our visit at Emporia and how well that went. But we also visited all of their districts as well. So depending on how many events you went to, from January to May, it was around 30 dates. And Mr. Skinner this summer has not stopped. So just last week, he was at NASA at Space Camp, and he's been all over this summer. He's been home like one day at a time. So thankfully, that was him and not me, because my kids would have been really upset if I wasn't there. So the most recent thing that we did was the Kansas Future Teacher Academy, which is at Emporia State University. And we presented to 100 future educators, their high school students. That one makes me super excited because we had 2 Emporia high school students that attended, and Emporia NEA sponsored them to go. And we're talking about how we can get the district to sponsor some more and have more Emporia students at the Kansas Future Teacher Academy, which is run completely by past Kansas Teachers of the Year. So you'll find that a lot of conferences like Ed Rising, the Kansas Future Teacher Academy, the LEAD conferences, they are organized and run by past Kansas Teachers of the Year. So it is truly a goal to utilize us, and they do. So here's a few pictures. Actually, if it was in the present mode, then it would go through them all, but the transitions aren't there. So anyway, that's all right. So this is at the Capitol, and we all spoke in front of the Senate and House Ed Committee, and we were given 2 minutes to speak about what drives us in education and what we would tell a future educator. And then we also were recognized on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. And the other pictures in there just show some of the huge numbers of students that we presented to throughout the course of last spring. So that is basically it, except for what the future holds for the Kansas Teacher of the Year members. In September, we go to the Leadership Conference, which we're responsible for planning 2 hour presentations. And we also will be there to pass the torch to the Kansas Teacher of the Year team for 2024. In October, we present at the State Board of Education again. And then in November is Kansas Leads Conference, which again is organized by the Kansas Teachers of the Year. And from there, K-Toys and past K-Toys go on in their own directions in their passion areas. And so for me, mine is recruitment and retention. And what can I do to make a difference locally and at the state level? And so I have advocated for mentoring here in Emporia, and I'm helping with that this year as a mentor coordinator. And in addition to that, I'm serving on committees that other Kansas Teacher of the Years are on with the state registered apprenticeship for teaching, and advising and advocating there, as well as next summer, we will organize a leadership conference for those apprentices that are going into the program. In addition to that, I'm serving for KNEA in a mentoring, growing that mentoring program for those people that are entering into the apprenticeship, the state registered apprenticeship. So that's my area of passion. I want to make a difference in growing the profession and doing what I can to support people that want to be teachers, because that is the number one thing you need. If you're going to be a great teacher, is you have to want to be there. So sometimes people have found themselves in careers that are not education, but they desire to be in the classroom. And so if we can identify those people and help support them so that they can grow and get the credentials they need to be a teacher and then be successful and retained, then we can make a difference there. So obviously that is a big area for me. What has Kansas Teacher of the Year done for me? I feel like I've been exposed to so much growth and opportunity. This has really grown my capacity and leadership and helped me to see what can I do beyond my district? What can I do in my district? And I think that that is one of the best parts of the Kansas Teacher of the Year program, is to really elevate the profession and elevate those professionals that are nominated, not just those that are finalists, but really recognize them for what they are doing and help them grow their capacity to lead. That is all.
Does anyone have questions for Erica?
I would just say thank you for your service. This is a lot of events. It's even more than I thought it was. So thank you for representing our district. And, you know, I heard you speak before and mention just how energized you are because of this opportunity. So I'm really excited to see future Kansas Teacher of the Years from Emporia School District.
Yeah, and I actually really meant to say that. So thank you so much for your commitment as a board and as a district to support me as I traveled around the state. Obviously, there's a cost to that, and I appreciate the investment that you made.
Awesome presentation. Thanks, sweet, and your enthusiasm is contagious. Remind us how you were nominated and how you got there so that we know how we can help that happen for others.
Okay, so actually it's about that time of year again. Staff nominate their colleagues, and we nominate for Master Teacher and Kansas Teacher of the Year at the same time. And there are some years of experience requirements that differ between the two of them. And then we have a committee that includes Judy Stanley, past Kansas Teacher of the Year nominees and finalist recipients, whatever they are, and past master teachers. And once teachers are nominated by their colleague, they submit a teaching philosophy and a resume. And we have a rubric that we use, and we go through every teaching philosophy and every resume. And our goal is to put forward the strongest candidate for both of those awards. And then we recognize them usually in October. And then they begin their application process once they're selected.
Erica, didn't we talk to a district or a couple districts that are working like years ahead? And we talked about how we could maybe start planning years ahead and start really beefing up, resumes and letters of application.
Yeah, I do believe that that is a thing in other districts. Yeah. And it would be awesome if we moved to our timeline for spring, and then people would have the summer to just enjoy that they were nominated. And then in the fall, when the paperwork hits them, they can, or they could take the summer and start, no, they can't start writing because the applications don't open, but they could reflect and think about what they would write about over the summer. So it would be a great idea to move our timeline back a little bit, but it just seems like everything kind of always runs on top of each other in the education world.
Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks, Erica. Okay. I think we're ready for item 6B, 2022-2023 Student Behavior Data Review.
As we've talked, student behavior has been a concern. And so Judy Stanley, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching, Learning, and Student Services, is here to give a recap and then what's also planned for this year.
So I think I have the longest title ever when she introduces me. Okay, so good evening. Tonight we're going to just give an overview of student behavior for this past year. This does align with our board goals for supporting the social, emotional development of our educational community, as well as providing and maintaining a safe environment for all of our members, our staff, and our students. As we look at the purpose of this presentation, we're going to provide an update over the incidents, the number, give you data over the major student behaviors. We're also going to talk about what action steps we took this past school year, as well as what's our plan for this upcoming year. As Dr. Harder shared, while it feels like these behaviors are intensifying, there's more, there's the exploding, this is not new. It is we've heard people say, oh, it's because of COVID, or we don't have strategists. We have seen an increase in the intensity of behavior for many years. We've always had students in our schools that have had aggressive behavior, but the number was minimum. For the past several years, we've had that number grow. Does it feel like more, and are there more? Yes, but it has been growing. You know about the loft, you know about the beehive, you know about the reef, all of these special classrooms in the buildings, those were as a result of these intense behaviors. Those classrooms happened prior to COVID. So I just wanted to point out that this, while we're giving you data for this past school year, this is not a new problem. It's one we've been trying to address over time. As I share the data with you and we talk about everything, please remember that everything that I present will be done in a manner that protects the confidentiality of our students as well as our staff. It's a law, but it's also something we want to do for everyone. This is the one piece that often causes us the most struggle with the adults, is that confidentiality piece. Because if my child gets hit by another child, I want to know, what are you going to do about this? And the administration can't share what they're going to do about that. Or if I'm a staff member in a building and I see that a classroom is being evacuated or a child is screaming down the hallway, I want to know, well, what was going on down there? Nobody can talk about what was going on down there. And that can be oftentimes frustrating. It can also feel like we are being passive or we're not addressing the issue. That's not it. We have a responsibility to maintain the confidentiality of our students and staff involved in the situation. So as you ask questions or I share the data, just remember it's really big picture. Okay, we have two types of behaviors that we talk about or we look at. We have minor student behaviors, and those are typically behaviors that just impact the student and can be addressed by the teacher. There's some examples up there, and those are behaviors that typical classroom management techniques work for. Maybe a child is tapping his pencil, or you've got a sidebar conversation. You know, that happens in adult meetings as well. Then the teacher does some strategic classroom management strategies to address those behavior. We don't collect data on that because, we're doing that 100% of the time when you're a teacher. You are speaking as you're managing a classroom at the same time. So we don't ask a teacher to collect data on how many times she's redirected the class. But there are those behaviors that are taken care of in the classroom by the teacher. And then we have the next slide. Our major behaviors. Now, these are behaviors that are harmful or illegal or show disorderly conduct. They could also be a minor behavior that is repetitive. Maybe a child has blurted out to the teacher, argued with the teacher multiple times in one day. That could be escalated into a major behavior that then would result in a referral to the office. All of these major behaviors would be behaviors that would be an office referral, either administration gets involved in, a counselor, a student support specialist. Examples would be severe disrespect. That's something that we often see at the secondary level. Physical or verbal aggressive behavior, running from the classroom. Kindergartners do this. First graders do this. Fighting, bullying. You can see the list there. These would be examples of major student behaviors. As we look at this data, this is data for those major behaviors. These are the, Dr. Cargilla pulled out of Power School any incident that was categorized as a major behavior. We had 3,729 incidents for this past year. Now, of those incidents, that involved 960 students. So that's not 3,700 students with an incident, that's 960. Those 960, some had one incident, some had multiple. We broke it down by level. We have EHS, We have included the Learning Center in that number, and that is due to the number of incidents at the Learning Center. It's small enough that if someone dug hard enough, or you know anything about people at the Learning Center, you might be able to identify the students. So if you put EHS and the Learning Center together, there are 694 incidents. The middle school had 1,494, and our pre-K elementary was 1,541. Again, Jones is included in the elementary due to the small number of incidents. We wanted to pull out, identify which students had multiple incidents, because that's really, really important. You might have a child, you might have two kids that got in a fight one day. They've never had anything happen before, but for whatever reason, they got in a fight, but they've had one incident. That's a lot different than someone with 20 incidents. So what you see here is the number of kids that had one incident, 444, versus the number of kids who have 30 logged in PowerSchool. As the number increases, that's when you will have your administration, your counselors, your student support specialists. We are now starting to identify these are kids we need to start intervening with because of the number of incidents. But it's really important to understand that maybe those repeated incidents are things like tardies. I've had multiple tardies from this classroom. It may not be violent behaviors. I think that's the first thing we go to. But it may not be a violent behavior. It really could be something that is as simple as that. Maybe it is not completing my homework. Maybe it's refusing to do work. But not that we wouldn't address those, but you just address it in a different way. Okay. As I looked through the data for the students, I thought it would be important to see what kind of incidents were being logged. We had disruption of classes, the excessive tardies, skipping class, refusing to follow directions, off task. You can read those. Those are the behaviors that were logged overall in PowerSchool. The consequences included ISS, OSS, those typical items, timeout, conferencing with the student. Sometimes it was a simple, I had a meeting with the student. Sometimes it's a conference with a parent. Maybe we did something other than recess. Maybe we had detention. If the behavior is severe enough, maybe law enforcement was contacted, or maybe we reached out to mental health. So those would be the things that were included in all of those logs. We were asked to look at specific incidents that were related to violent or aggressive behavior toward others. This is data that the principals provided to us, and we broke it out again by high school, middle school, and elementary. At the high school level, 2% of the students were involved in some type of aggressive or violent action that resulted in an incident. None of those students were involved in more than one, and in special education, it was less than 10. For the middle school, smaller percentage, 1.67%, 25 kids, 11 of those kids were repeat. So they have more than one incident, and 12 of them are in special education. And then we get to the elementary world, and it's quite a bit higher. We have 11.16% at 172 students. 106 had more than one incident, and 76 were in special education. One thing to think about, to know and understand, that I may have a child who within the first 2 to 3 months has 15 log entries, because they may have started as a kindergartner, and kindergarten is a big transition for a lot of our kids. That structure, the sitting, the listening, I don't get to play with the toys when I want to, and their first reaction is aggression. So they may start off with a lot of log entries, but then the interventions start, and that decreases over time. So the data is really high, but there's a lot of interventions in place where kids start to be successful. So I just wanted to point that out at that elementary level. When we address aggressive behavior, the first thing what we're going to do is identify an appropriate consequence. An appropriate consequence would be something that fits the behavior, and we're trying to deter the child from doing that behavior again. Sometimes that's an ISS, sometimes that's a timeout. Sometimes they ran down the hall, so we're going to have them walk down the hall. It varies depending on the student. Sometimes it's written into a behavior plan, but we're going to look at the student, look at the situation, and identify the consequence. If it's a student with many repeated incidents, Then we're going to look at a functional behavior assessment. And what that is we make observations. It's usually the student support specialist or a counselor. They go into the classroom for small bits of time and you collect data over certain behaviors. And based upon that behavior assessment, we identify behaviors that we need to intervene on. And we create a behavior intervention plan. Now, when you look at those behaviors, you have to determine which behaviors are we going to target first. For those kids that are at this level, typically they have more than one behavior that's causing them issues. They will be unsuccessful with being able to cope with those and learn how to self-regulate if we try to address all of them. So what we do is if it's a lot of behaviors that could kind of be considered minor, they're really annoying, they're disruptive, but they're not hurting anyone, we pick the strategy that the child can be most successful with the fastest, and that's what we address first so we can start tackling other behaviors. And often with those type of students, because of the self-regulation strategies that they're learning, it starts to address some of those other behaviors. But if it's a student where it's an aggressive behavior, where others might be harmed, or we're having to remove the other students from the classroom, then we're going to tackle that major behavior first. So maybe the child is a kid who's blurting out a lot in the classroom. We may ignore that because we're going to address the fact that he throws things in the classroom. Does that make sense? What can be frustrating with this is that a behavior intervention is very similar to an academic intervention. So if I'm a child, little Judy Stanley, we recognize she needs a reading intervention, and I start my reading intervention on Monday. On Friday, I'm not going to be reading. It's going to take time for me to learn how to read. The same thing happens with the behavior, but it's just natural for us all to want it to be fixed. We do a behavior intervention on Monday. We want the behavior fixed on Friday. And those students, these are innate. These are behaviors that's their first go-to. So we have to teach them how to self-regulate and those coping strategies and a replacement behavior, and that takes time. So when we think about a behavior plan in that sense, we also have to think about, what do we do with the rest of the class? What do we do for the teacher? Because it's a bit bigger. Academics affect me, behavior can affect more than one. In some incidents, we also create a safety plan. We involve parents. You will have parents that are very supportive and very involved, and you will have parents that won't pick up the phone. That is the reality. They see that a phone call is coming from the school and they know what it's about, and so they don't pick up the phone. So we do our best to involve the parents in that situation. We want their input. We want them to be partners in how to address the behavior. But, there is some people believe that, I don't ask you at the school to help address my behavior at home. Don't ask me at school. We know we should be a partnership, but that is a barrier that we have to address, and we are always working toward. And then when we have an aggressive incident where we might have to remove the students in the classroom, first thing the teachers do is try to prompt the kids to focus on something else. So they're not giving the attention to the student with the behavior. If the kid's screaming or they're kicking their desk, we're trying to redirect the other students. If it's determined that we need to evacuate the classroom, then once everything gets settled back down, then teachers will hold a class meeting. They will gauge where the kids are. Like, do we need to talk about it? But if we talk about what's going on, we can't talk about that specific incident because, again, it's confidentiality. So what we have to talk about is, in general, if something were to happen in our classroom or something like this, what's going to be our next step? How do you feel? What can we do to support each other? So we have to keep it very general because we have to. Yes, we all know they know which student was involved, but we cannot talk about it that way. We also don't want students to start thinking about that child as, well, he's got problems. We don't want that to happen either. So we want to talk about how we can support each other. There are limitations to what we can do when it comes to our behavior plans and our consequences. The first is the age of the child. Obviously, if a kindergartner elopes from the classroom, we're going to treat that child differently than we would if a senior in the high school did that. And so that's something to always keep in mind. I mean, we also have legal limitations. I just talked about evacuating a classroom. If a child is not in imminent danger of harming themselves or others, then the administration, the counselor, the student, no staff member can remove that child from the classroom because they're not in danger of hurting someone. So, perfect example is the kid who's pounding on his desk and screaming at the top of his lungs, and the teacher's trying to calm them down, trying to redirect, and they're not having it because they don't want to take the test. They weren't finished with recess for whatever reason. Well, there's no learning going on. The child is getting a lot of attention, and the teacher can't even redirect. In that situation, we would remove the other kids. Now, our first instinct would be get that kid out of the classroom, but if he won't go with the adult, then we have to remove the other kids because the law says we cannot remove the student from the classroom. That is also very frustrating to staff, to families. We understand that, but that is the limitation that we have when we're looking at what we can do.
Judy, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times, this is too much of a, it's getting in the way of learning. They need to be somewhere else until they can get this under control. What's considered?
Jen, that's a really good question. It does depend on the situation, but it's also one of those things that in a future slide, I'll talk about what we're getting ready to do. One of the strategies, one of the things that we're going to do this year is start calibrating on what does that mean? Because what we're hearing, what we're learning is we are handling it differently in different buildings. And if a child causes the classroom to be disrupted, evacuated, should they be back in the classroom? That's really where we all need to be on the same page. So Dr. Mickelson, thank goodness she's on our team, is going to be leading that charge, and we will be pulling our team together and coming together on the same page. I could share with you what I think, but there's a lot of people that need to be involved in that conversation, and we're getting ready to have it with our building principals and our student support specialists and our school psychologists at the elementary level.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I did want to clarify when removing the student. So if the student goes
Yes.
agreeably, if say, hey, let's walk down the hallway. Of course, we're not going to evacuate. So it's after attempts, and as long as a student is not endangering other students or him or herself, that we would evacuate. So evacuation isn't near to a last resort because we want our kids, but we also want our students to be focused on instruction and not to have their day disrupted and not to have their day impacted. So we walk that line, and putting our hands on a student, which we never want to do, but if we have to do it in a way that's restraint, we do have specific training that we provide all of our new teachers, our classified staff. And so we have very specific ways that we would approach that CPI training. So, and we talk a lot about what is the least restrictive way, the least intensive way. So we always start with de-escalation. So if we can intervene with verbal before we ever get to even just putting a hand on an arm or anything, just to even gently like redirect, we're going to go verbal, and we're always going to go the least amount of interaction as possible, the least amount of physical interaction as possible.
So reflecting on this year, we focused the majority of our time on the elementary level and the pre-K level, mainly because one, we were short a staff member, and two, the intensity of the behavior at the elementary level. That is really where we're seeing the most aggressive behavior at. Typically kindergarten first, some second. There are other age levels, but that's where we're really seeing this behavior. That's what's causing the most stress for our staff members and families who have children in those classrooms. And so last summer, Tara Glades and I, we started the summer with pulling the student support specialists together, the elementary principals, to really calibrate processes. And at that time, we had this big plan for that one day and realized very quickly that we had to revamp what we were doing because all of our buildings were doing things very differently. So we spent several meetings just talking about, well, what's a major and what's a minor behavior? And how do we get all on the same page with that? That happened throughout the summer. And then the other thing that we did was provided the student support specialist the opportunity to meet more than just when district PLCs are. Historically, we've had 6 times of the year where special area teachers and can meet together as a district team. But if the buildings are not having something going on Wednesdays, there's no reason why the student support specialists can't meet virtually, can't meet in person to collaborate, to brainstorm, to talk about all of these things and get on the same page. So we started that as well in the fall. This spring, with the support of Pam Stranathan as our SDAC consultant, we started meeting monthly to start reining in some of this. Reining, that's not the right word, but getting us all on the same page again, really address some of these pieces. We talked about legal requirements related to special education, alternative settings, abbreviated day, checking in and out with students, really using those rooms to be very proactive versus just where we go when we're having a meltdown. Fine-tuning the SIT process, which is our student improvement team process. Plans for how to respond to student behaviors if we're removing a student, and that communication piece. As we look into the next year, we're going to continue all of that, but we also have the district-wide Capturing Kids' Hearts implementation. Now, the nice piece about that is that the piece that we hear from secondary is apathy, huge apathy, disrespect, along with THC, but the apathy and the disrespect is huge. Well, we know if you have strong relationships, that can help address some of those things. And that's what Capturing Kids' Hearts is all about. So being able to be district-wide with that should be a great thing for all of us. So thank you again for allowing us to do that. We will continue to calibrate our responses to behavior so that just like you said, Jen, so how many times do we evacuate classroom? How many times does a child cause disruption? What does that mean? What's the next step? So we're going to be working on that. We also recognize we need to have very much clearer guidelines on how we log discipline entries in PowerSchool. We pulled that data based upon where they were categorized, but there are quite a few entries that didn't have categories to them. And there are a lot of categories that could be interpreted to be the same, but might not be. So teaching and learning and student services will be fine-tuning that so that we can make sure we have consistency with that across the district. And a big reason for that too is, we have 6 elementary schools that feed into the middle school. If everybody's recording it in a different manner, that does not help Mr. Martin and his team when the kids get there. And same thing with the middle school going into the high school. So we will be working on that. We're going to continue the work with the student support specialists and the building principals. We're going to extend our work into the secondary level to see what can we do to support the students there. Continue to research best practices. We're going to expand that functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan training. We have some staff who've been through it, but they want a refresher, and we have some brand new staff who have not had that training. So we're going to be doing that here in August. And then hopefully an expansion of our multidisciplinary team. And that multidisciplinary team is really a community type of support for families. So it includes staff from like Crosswinds and DCF and in any community resource that we feel like might be able to support the family. The trick to that is we have to have parent permission to allow us to share information with each other. So those are our next steps. What questions do you have for me?
Okay, does anyone feel compelled to go first? Questions for Judy?
Is there a plan to, and I think all of us want to know this, but on the STAY survey, we all noticed, just a lot of the comments from teachers were about just feeling unable to handle, especially over time, the student behavior combined with the lack of parental support. Again, there's a limited amount that any of us can do about that latter part. But is there a plan to have a focus group of teachers where they can freely give ideas for what they feel would be, I mean, I know what some best practices are, obviously that's your job, but where they feel like they can give some input on this is what would help us when we're dealing with these types of situations. I just want them to feel, we want them to feel like they're being heard and like we're not looking at them going, well, you should just be able to handle it, because that's frustrating. And they're walking away, rather than doing that. So
we don't have a district plan to do that. Is that something we could look at? Absolutely. What I do know is that we have at the individual building level, some of our principals have actually been doing that with their staff. I think that the biggest piece for us is getting that input and working together to make sure we're consistent. So do we have a plan to pull them in? But not at this moment, but it is something that we absolutely could do. I think our first and foremost first step is just getting all of our student support specialists and administrators on the same page. And as well, we want to make sure that the administrators feel confident in the consequences and the behavior interventions that they're allowed to use. I think there's been question over time. I was an elementary principal, and we weren't always sure what would be supported and what wasn't. So that was our first step.
We did notice over last year that just we need to have some refreshers about classroom management. So some of our very capable teachers, veteran teachers, were coming back, and we just had different behaviors, and so they were struggling a little bit, and so it just became evident that we really need to go back and do some refreshers, and as well as some of that new professional development about what's some really effective interventions to help students with behaviors. I think really also intentionally teaching in tiers 2 and 3. And so adding that second student support specialist, which we did last year, we also realized we really need to work with that second or first student support specialist that may not have that as their background. So helping them understand, what does that instruction look like? And what does it look like when you're teaching a student what is a replacement behavior? Because just telling a student to stop it, they need somewhere to go with that, that energy and that behavior. So what's that replacement behavior that's appropriate and they can use in those times that they might be frustrated or bored or sleepy? So helping them all understand that.
Yeah. So I think in response to that, something that Leslie and I had been chatting about previously was when I first started teaching, the district that I started my career in offered a classroom management coach, someone that could come in, and she came in like often. I want to say it was like 3 days a week for 2 weeks. And then her and I met, and she was like, here's what I'm seeing in your classroom. I don't know if that's something that we could provide, or if that could be kind of connected in with the mentoring for new teachers. And then I went back and looked at the years of experience. Thank you for sending that. So in the STAY survey, a lot of the teachers that responded were early in their career. And when I reflect on the first years of my career, you're kind of getting your feet under you and managing, teaching the material and doing the classroom management, all the other stuff that comes with teaching. And then when Erica earlier was talking about how excited she is about mentoring, I hope that that's something that our mentors can help our newer teachers with as well.
Classroom management typically becomes one of those hot topics with the instructional coaches as they work with new teachers that are struggling. So that is something that the coaches do support them with. One thing that we've not done well is those teachers who are on TAP licenses, and I do not know what that acronym stands for, but it's not a full teaching license. So those transitional type of licenses who have never student taught, who haven't had an educational classroom, maybe they've been a para, but they've not really set up a classroom. What we've not done well is set them up for success. And we've learned very quickly that the universities haven't had the chance, or maybe the university they're going to isn't providing that support. So this year, what we are doing is their new teacher training is going to look completely different than what the new teacher training would for a teacher on initial license. So one of our instructional coaches will be working with them, and she is going to be talking about how are you going to set up your classroom? What are your classroom management techniques to use? What would you do if a student did this? And just talking about organizing their day. How does the lesson plan go? What these kids, how do I arrange my classroom? What do I need to have in the classroom? So that's something we have tweaked. The mentoring, the nice thing about having our classroom teachers and our content area teachers be our mentors for our initial license is it frees up the instructional coaches a little bit to be able to provide more intensive support for those teachers that need it. When they were the mentor for all of the teachers, they simply just didn't have time. But we have had instructional coaches in classrooms teaching for half a day, for a week at a time with the teachers that struggle. But we are making some adjustments because we know we have teachers that are on this transitional that don't have any experience with that. So we've made that adjustment.
So I know you said that the numbers, we've always had the behaviors. They're not brand new. They are increasing somewhat. Is it historically been kindergarten, first grade, and second grade that you see the most behaviors, or is that more recent?
Well, in my experience, it's been kindergarten first, and it starts dropping off in second grade.
And yeah, and that was my next question is
Mhm.
generally, lessen over time as kids learn to regulate and mature a
Yep.
little bit and get used to the school setting.
Yep, you will see for many of the kids, you'll see a change happen about third grade, second grade. Some of them it doesn't. Some are that more intense and they end up maybe needing support and special education. But for many of these kids, by the time they get to second or third, those interventions are starting to work and they started to learn how to self-regulate and sit in a classroom and follow directions. But that's where we've seen the most increases, kindergarten and first.
I also wondered, I know that we by no means have money coming out of our ears. And throwing money at a problem isn't always the solution. But is there something that we could do that hasn't been asked for yet that we as a board could support financially, whether it be, paying for more training, outside of the contractor, adding that onto the tentative agreement, all those things. Like, what can we do additionally that we haven't considered because money is an object, right? It is an issue.
We're actually looking at a couple of different platforms that actually do provide some really strong training and would provide that outside coaching piece that may not be weekly like you were talking about, but it's coming from the company and that's their specialty. So we're looking at some of those things and it may be that necessity to use some of our PD money very directed that way. The real trick to all of this is overwhelming teachers with all of this training. Like, when do you do it? Now, trying to remember, do best practice. So that's the real trick to all of it. Because they do have a lot that you've got AVID, you've got PSYOP, you've got the new math and the new ELA. And so that's the real trick. But we are looking into a couple of options because this is also a really big need for us.
I will say too, it may not feel like there's success, but we have seen success. And so that's the important thing. And that the principals and teachers and SSS and counselors, district office, everybody takes this very seriously and it is a priority because we want all students to want to come to school and enjoy school, every single student.
And that's why I pointed out on that data when we talked about the repetitive behaviors and maybe I have 20 log entries or 30. Some of those kids, it really was the first half of the year because I'm just trying to figure it all out. And the school was very successful in helping intervene and give those kids those self-regulation strategies. We just also have some kids with some really, really intense behaviors that go beyond those type of things. But we do have really good things going on in the schools.
One thing, and again, we're here to speak on behalf of concerned parents as well, obviously. But when you said something interesting in regards to the confidentiality, obviously we know teachers, admin, you're not going to name names of students, but like you said, the student that witnessed the meltdown of their peer knows who it was and can very easily go home or go wherever and tell someone. But you made the statement, we can't share what is being done. But you can't share what is being done about that student. But I do think that some communication needs to occur with parents because I've spoken with Allison, like some people have pulled their kids because just the frustration on the lack of communication. And even if things are being done, if they feel like things aren't being done and we lose them, then that's pretty sad. So I think we can share what is being done in general terms. You know what I mean? If there was communication that when this happens in the classroom,
Right.
just FYI, here is how it is dealt with.
Right.
We cannot state anything about a specific student, but if this happens, here is what we do. And like you're saying, if you're going to have these meetings and maybe codify that a little more and get it to where it is consistent among buildings and grades and all of that. But I think it would serve our parents and our families well, especially to know if this goes down and someone is pounding their, or whatever specific behavior it is, here is what will be done. And and that it's going to be followed through on. Not that that's what we have in writing that we do, but it is being done. I think a lot of parents want that confidence.
So as we calibrate and get all on the same page, that will be easier to come up with that communication. But I think you're right. I think that gives a sense of security for families that it's not being ignored. and yet still we protect the privacy of the student. We know that little Johnny's going to talk about Judy because Judy had a meltdown, but we as a school are not going to do that. But yes, I think that would we're always looking for ways to communicate. How can we make that better? So I think that's a great idea. We can add that to our tasks.
Thank you, Judy, for your presentation. I have a few questions. I know you put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate that. With respect to the functional behavioral assessment, I'm kind of curious a little bit more about what that looks like. Can you refresh us what happens to trigger that for a student, and what does it actually measure? Where does that come from? Is it from the state Department of Education, or is that something we've internally made? I'm kind of curious what that looks like and how it actually measures these issues.
Okay, so the trigger would be when a behavior has occurred so many times that I've got 5 log entries. I've had 5 office referrals. We know that the child isn't learning because of the behaviors and others aren't either. We have to do something. So that's when the student improvement team might decide we're going to do a functional behavior assessment. Now, there's functional behavior assessments that companies write them all the time, but they're very, very similar. Essentially, what you do is you identify which behaviors am I going to be looking at. This is kind of I'm just going to throw one behavior out, but let's say it's blurting out. It's a student that blurts out a lot to the extent that the teacher's constantly being interrupted. And so I, as a student support specialist or a counselor, would come in and I'm going to observe for, say, 15 minutes. And every 15 seconds, I'm going to jot down what that child is doing, or if they blurted out. I'm going to tally mark every time they blurted out in that 15 minutes. Or I'm going to write every 15 seconds, I'm going to write down what they're doing. But it's a time frame often, and we record the behaviors. And we come in, Allison would know better than I do. You have, I don't know, I might come in once every day for a week or multiple times during the day. And based upon that data that I gather, then I can identify, okay, here's the behavior that I need to target. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just curious what that functionally looked like.
So we're looking for the function of the behavior. We're looking to identify what's causing that behavior. Are they blurting out because they didn't like the task? Are they blurting out because of who's sitting beside them? Are they blurting out because of the time of the day? So we're looking for the function of the behavior. If we're starting to recognize that a certain time of the day a child's having a meltdown, then we know, you know what, about 5 minutes before that, 10 minutes before that, we're going to build in an automatic break so we can help that child self-regulate before that happens. Or if we know, PE is not the place they need to go right now because unstructured play is really where they have a struggle, then we're going to find an alternative type of physical activity for them to do until they can regulate themselves through that. Does that help?
Yeah.
Is that more clear?
Yeah, that gives, I think, a very firm example of what that looks like in practice.
And we're also looking for reinforcement. So what are they getting out of that? That might be, it could be negative reinforcement. So maybe they like the attention of the students. That may not be positive, but they're still getting the attention. So we're looking specifically at what is reinforcing that behavior so it continues.
Right. And you've talked about getting all of the different buildings kind of onto the same page, all following the same rubric, so that the way I'm kind of understanding it is when X number of things happen, Y happens, so that it's uniform across buildings and just uniform everywhere, and it kind of sets expectations. When we finish that project, will we have to reduce that to writing, to policy, in any handbooks? What will that look like when it's put on paper, I guess? How does that get effectuated? Or are we just not there yet?
Well, we want to be
Good
careful. Yeah, we
question.
have, I mean, because every child, every human's unique. And so we have some really good policies in place right now. We may find that we need to tighten some things up. And so we will definitely be bringing those back, and we'll look at the calibration and really differentiating, because we have some buildings with a really good handle on behavior, and we have some other buildings that might need some extra support. So really just differentiating what they need as well. That will help us know what we need to do moving forward.
And the reason I asked that question is that something you kind of alluded to earlier, or was alluded in our conversation, was making sure that people knew what their expectations were and when they can do what. Because if people don't know that they can respond this way and they don't, then maybe that is to the detriment of other students. Maybe that's not the most effective way to respond to that student and help them. But I can see, your rank and file, boots on the ground employees saying, tell me what I'm allowed to do, and then I will do it. And if I don't know what I'm allowed to do, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And that's kind of where I was getting
Yeah.
at with that.
The difficulty with putting it into a strict policy is because of how you have to look at situations differently. If I'm a child on a behavior plan, and let's say that the teacher didn't follow the behavior plan, because I had a behavior plan and it wasn't followed, now the principal is limited on what consequence they can have. They can't give the consequence because we violated that child's rights. And so if you put it in policy, then community, parents, teachers, they're going to think, well, this is what the policy says, but we didn't give that child what they needed to be successful. So I don't know the answer in terms of what legally we have to do. I just know that when we have so many different situations and legally we have to look at things differently depending on the student. I don't want us to tie our hands and make it more difficult for people.
And I wasn't necessarily advocating that we put it all down on ink. I'm just thinking in terms of, I'm that person who's been hired next year and I don't know what I don't know. And I think we've all been in that position, especially when we started a new job or changed jobs. I can't be held to accomplish something if I don't know what you're expecting of me. So I'm mindful of how we will be able to tackle that issue so that everyone really is on the same page and stays on the same page. So it doesn't just kind of come up again later and we have to reset and recalibrate a different time.
It needs to become part of our orientation with new staff, new teachers, new admin. It just needs to become part of it.
Right. Yep. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Anybody else? Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Dr. Cardula. We appreciate you putting all of this together.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll go on to item 7A, teacher retention rate update.
Mr. Jared Giffen, Director of Human Resources, is providing the annual update.
All right, thanks for having this up here, Casey. I've got a couple of things that I've combined, and we'll kind of run through the numbers here first. This is a report that we've provided annually to the board in the summertime after the previous school year is completed, talking about the numbers of teachers, certified staff that have left, and the variety of reasons that they may have left the profession or left USD 253. You can see here very clearly the comparisons over the years. I'm just going to hit kind of last year's numbers as well as this year's, and then we'll get into some of the exit interview information that Dr. Harder and I were able to collect in visiting with some staff members who left the district. So you can see we had several retirements, but not as many as we did in 21-22. So there were 9 and 14 there respectively. There were 29 people who just left the profession for a variety of reasons just last year, and then the previous year there were 35. Several moved from the area, but not as many as there were the previous year. There were 6 last year and then 13 in 21-22. Some accepted a position in another Kansas school. There were 10 and 19 there respectively. A couple of people moved out of state. A couple of people accepted an administrative position, which is great for us, but then we also had to look at filling those spots. There was a health-related reason. There were 4 that we weren't sure about, so we listed there as other. Overall, there were 63 staff members that left last year, as opposed to 86 the previous year. And you can see the percentages there as well. And at the bottom of the page, we always like to put just the administrative piece on there from last year. There were 6 folks that left us. One's returning to the classroom, one's leaving the profession. One accepted an administrative position out of state. 2, again, accepted an administrative position in state, and then there was one that we just weren't sure what their plans were. So overall, those were the numbers from last year. And again, I mentioned the exit interviews. Anytime someone leaves, we always have contact with those folks and offer them the opportunity to meet with either Dr. Harder or I individually, or the 2 of us together. Last year, of the 69 people that left between the teachers and the administrators, I think we had 17 or so that chose to have that option. Some met with us together, some individually, but I think we were able to glean some of the same information in the conversations that we had with them. So I first wanted to talk about, I think we're down on slide 4 there. There we go. Some of the positive themes that came out of our conversations. One of the things was just the progress in updating our curricular resources. Many people really talked about having that new math resource last year and how beneficial that was. Helped them cut down on their workload a little bit. I think we also saw a presentation recently of just about the effects it had on student achievement in the area of math, and we saw some increases there. So that was great, and we're looking forward to many of the same things with our ELA resource this year, and hopefully we're able to continue doing that in our other areas and help reduce some of that workload for teachers that they've had on them by not having something solid each year. Salary increases. We've been very fortunate for teachers in the last couple of years to add, I think, 1,500 at the end of last year and then another 1,000 this year. Our classified staff, we just finished phase 2 of increases there. So several people mentioned that, although in a minute you're going to hear that was a reason that some people chose to leave as well. But it's great to hear that there are staff appreciative of the things that we're able to do for them. A few of them also mentioned support from the administrators that they work with, supervisors, the directors of their departments. They just felt like they were very supported. Some were very, very sad to leave, but just relocated or had other opportunities presented to them. The next slide touches upon some areas that were identified that we want to continue to improve in. And all of these are areas that are on our radar and have been for a while. But I can tell you these are areas of continued conversation, not just among administrators, but among teachers, in collaboration with teachers at IBB, in ENEA. So these are topics that come up on a regular basis that we're always looking at how we can continue to improve and enhance these areas. We just talked about student behavior, so I don't need to go into that too much. Culture and climate seems to come up. I think if someone's had a negative experience, that tends to affect their ideas and attitudes towards their work environment or their colleagues or whatever the situation might be. But I can tell you that's on the list of administrators' radars, and I know it is teachers as well. When we went out on our listening tours last year, we really focused on having staff spread those positive messages. Dr. Mickelson with new teachers this morning mentioned the importance of just sharing those positive messages of the great things that we've got going on in our schools. The more negative people hear, the more they tend to believe that that's the truth and reality. But we do have a tremendous amount of great things going on in our district. Communication was another piece that we know we can always improve on. The variety of situations come up, and people always have different perspectives. But internally, externally, it's an area that is a focus for us. Salary and insurance, again, the insurance piece is one that was indicated in a few situations where we talked to those staff members. Workload, and we've mentioned that just a little bit. Hopefully the resources will help there, but we also know some of the lack of staffing has attributed to other people having to pick up that workload, and it's really put some stressors on several of our folks. So those were some of the primary areas that were noted in more than one occasion in the interviews that we had with those staff members. As far as comparisons, the same thing rings true across the state and across the nation. In an article from Ed Week that I was reading just a couple of weeks ago, the 3 bullet points there are ones that were specifically measured to, and they very closely match what Dr. Harder and I have heard, what you have seen in the state surveys that you have referenced this evening and previously as well. So our efforts is kind of the next item there. There's a lot here, and I'm going to add a few more things to it too, because I just want to make sure we're accentuating a lot of the positive things that we are doing. Again, we have continual conversations about the items that are listed and that we've spoken about, the curriculum resources, the compensation, this capturing kids' hearts. I think it's going to be so important and great for us to have that pre-K through 12. We're all talking the same language and really trying to build upon the relationships that we want to see happen in our schools and in our classrooms. The parental leave policy this year, that's going to be a huge addition to our negotiated agreement and what we can do for our staff. It's going to operate much like our personal illness pool, but those who would need parental leave for those things that are covered would be able to request additional days with only a percentage of those being paid back. So those we're including in a lot of our handbooks tonight. We've approved it through IBB and the tentative agreement. So we're excited about that piece too. The child care opportunities. We're getting closer. We're still working through a few of the little issues that we need to get ready, but I know that the staff has been already working hard, getting those classrooms set up. So there's a lot going on there. Talked about recruiting and retaining a little bit ago. We're constantly looking at ways that we can do that. And just some little things that I know principals have done and staffs have done over the years. It's as easy as having a move-in day for new teachers, helping them bring their things into the classrooms and helping them get set up. Some of those first meetings and those relationship building pieces, whether it's a t-shirt or a lunch or a thumb drive. I mean, there's just a variety of things that I know buildings do to help them be more comfortable. There's a ton of team building things going on in the buildings. I think almost every meeting that we have, we did 2 or 3 today with our new teachers, which was awesome to see. It just lets people get to know each other without the stress of having to learn all the time. Capturing kids' hearts, we've mentioned that, but as a part of that, I think most classrooms anymore start their class periods with good things. A lot of the meetings that we have district-wide, that's the first thing we do. We don't get to the agenda. It's just, hey, tell us about some good things that are going on in your school, in your life, whatever it might be. So those little things like that are what hopefully will help us recruit and retain the best quality staff members that we can get. Let me see if I had a few other things listed here. Luncheons, when we meet, we eat. It's great here at Mary Herbert when we can get our groups together because we do operate independently a lot, but I know the same is true in buildings. Anytime we can have those luncheons and friendly chili competitions together, it just helps build that morale and sense of collegiality. So food is always a good thing. So really, that was a lot of what we collected. There were a few more individual responses that weren't included there, but that we can certainly provide more information if you'd like. But what questions might you have for Dr. Harder or I about retention rates or any of the exit interviews?
I have a question. As I'm looking at the first attachment, the why do teachers leave graph, it kind of sticks out that I think 2023, 29 left the profession entirely, found a job somewhere that wasn't education or education adjacent. And then the school year before that, it was 35. So it actually went down a little bit. But then when you look at 21 back to the 2014, 2015 period, you see that people did leave the profession, but not quite as massive as, 35 and 29. And of course, that's right around the time COVID happened and then after COVID. So 35 to 29 isn't a sharp drop, but I'm hopeful that over the years that will kind of decrease a little bit and get back to maybe more of a normal looking flow chart, so to speak. But, of those 29 people who left the profession entirely, those 35 the prior year that left the profession entirely, were you able to sort of gauge kind of the general consensus of issues that prompted them to leave the profession? And if so, could you maybe share some of what that appeared to be?
I think some of the things I noticed, childcare was one, which is great that we're able to offer that. I think insurance, better opportunities, better salaries in some other areas. I know a couple that left and went up north. They didn't have family close by, so their family was going to be able to help with the childcare for their children. So there were a number of reasons. A lot of them matched those kinds of things. And Dr. Ryder, I don't know if you have had any individuals and conversations that would have had other ideas or not.
Yeah, I was thinking I just lost my thought. I was gonna say. Hate when that
Student
happens.
behaviors
Student
is one
behaviors,
that
yeah.
was a common. And again, it's something that Mrs. Stanley addressed at length, and it's something that we know is on our radar, and we're doing a lot of things to try and cut down on that because we don't want people leaving because of those reasons. You'd mentioned COVID and the numbers before that. You could identify or try to guess at a variety of reasons because things did change a little bit. There were some changes with people coming back, whether it's our own personal attitudes when we were able to teach at home or work with people at home, and then that change of coming back and forgetting some of those classroom management techniques. I think it's just a compilation of a lot of different things.
I did remember. So the one thing that we heard last year when we did the exit surveys, just an overwhelming theme was accountability. Accountability for teachers, whether it was something as simple as dress code or holding students accountable, teachers holding students accountable, and then their colleagues holding students accountable to the same level. So that was one thing we did not hear. So that's a huge kudos to our administrators and teachers because they really worked very hard on that. That was something we talked about quite a bit at the beginning of last year. So that's a good that's a good indicator that that's working. And then we still have openings, but that's the same as everywhere. Any meeting that I go to with where there's other organizations in the community, they are constantly talking about the open positions that they have. So they've had the same situation, and like Mr. Giffen mentioned, the idea of being able to work remote, that's very attractive. And so having that opportunity and not dealing with some of the situations, and we've had some really great teachers that we are very sorry to see go. But then also, it's okay for them to go try something else because sometimes they appreciate coming back to the classroom. We are bringing back some people. One person that I saw today, a great teacher, she's coming back because we also have childcare. She didn't have childcare. So we're very excited and hoping that childcare and the parental leave will also be things that will draw people in. Also, Mr. Given had brought just recently just some comparisons across the state, just with districts that have shared information. And parental leave was something that was not that other districts didn't have. So that's something that we can draw other teachers from other districts too.
I think to Jeremy's point about people leaving the profession, there's over 1,000 open positions across the state right now, and we're like 3 weeks out from school starting. So this is a concern not just here in our district, but for the profession across the state. So I'm just kind of worried about where we are at and where things are going to go. But I am happy to see the numbers here trending downward from last year for sure.
And our CTE pathway teaching, I mean, that has tripled in numbers. And so Laura Schwinn is doing an amazing job, and that just continues to grow.
Yeah, just to piggyback back off of what Jeremy was saying, when you look at these numbers, it's dropped from 35 to 29, but I know we're getting asked a lot, is this in other districts that are comparable to our size and our demographics, is this happening where they're leaving education to go work at XYZ company that has nothing, and do you have any of that data in terms of, I mean, is this happening with their leaving the profession entirely in other districts?
Yes, I speak to directors and assistant superintendents all the time. I remember a conversation with a gentleman from the Kansas City, Kansas public school area, and he said the last 2 years he's had to hire over 250 new teachers each year. And it's just because people are leaving the profession altogether and doing different things or having opportunities, coming out of COVID, we've heard it called the Great Resignation. People just realized that being at home, there were other opportunities and I think have been exploring those. It's just another reason that we're seeing this right now.
I will add that NEA reported that 35% of teachers who've completed their survey said they're likely to quit within the next 2 years. So it's definitely not us. It just feels really bad for us. And anything we can do, of course, we're going to try. But yeah, man,
And along those lines, last year, especially our second semester listening tours, we were really talking about, okay, so what kinds of things can we do? Because we did hear about teachers, staff members, administrators feeling more isolated in their buildings. So they work maybe and develop relationships in their own buildings, but they're not developing relationships across the district. So we're very intentionally planning on some wellness activities throughout the year that really will engage staff members, looking at, like a tailgate before our first home football game, that we can have staff members bring their families. So really looking at not only just really developing those relationships and that feeling of belongingness, but also that culture and climate, just all of that, really wanting people to want to stay, want to come back every year.
I think you brought up something that, if I can say this right, I think the traditional workforce, and I don't say that to cast aspersions one way or another, I think our traditional workforce jobs and businesses are going to have to kind of recalibrate how they remain attractive to prospective employees now that remote work is a big thing. We didn't really have remote work. I think in our society, telework is what it really used to be called. We call it remote work now because that's the lexicon that happened during COVID. But people really, I think, are attracted to those jobs. They're flocking to them. People are leaving the profession for them because they realize during the pandemic they can work at home. They don't commute. They actually may get more work done and they save a whole lot more money. But there's certain professions where that's not really ever going to work, right? Like you can't really be a remote working teacher in a high school. If you're in a factory somewhere here, Simmons, Hostess, Hopkins, it's not remote work. There's certain professions that can't adapt to that. And I don't know quite how you compete with that, but I think that is a big element of that big number of people who leave the profession, is that there was a change in workforce practices. And I think a change collectively in what employees expect and now maybe demand of their employment. And how we adapt to that being kind of a traditional workforce environment, right? I think that's going to be a big issue going forward that we're going to see across all different industries to include education.
Great points.
I think the other thing is something that stood out to me this past week. Dr. Harder and Jamie and Casey and I were at a KSB Summer Leadership Institute, and someone there was talking about how their local university was having like 17, 18 graduates from their College of Education, from their teachers' college. And he was like, it's really hard, right? It's not just teachers leaving the profession, but it's also there's not necessarily the same number of graduates coming before. So it's really important that we're continuing to grow that teaching and training pathway, and that students at the university and high school level feel encouraged to join the profession as well, to kind of fill in from whether it's people leaving for remote work or whatever reason. We have to have people come back in. Yeah.
And on a positive note, I will add that I've been loving seeing the social media posts about all of our new staff members and teachers and everybody. And it's also been really exciting to see how many of them were our students and are now joining our staff. And I just think that's really, really awesome.
Carlos has been doing a great job of getting pictures out and that information about those new teachers. So appreciate that.
Thanks, Jared. Okay, are we ready for item 7B, 2023-24 certified staff handbooks for preschool, elementary, the middle school, and the high school?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Mr. Giffen will stay put. Also, we will welcome Mr. Tel Kirk for our elementary handbook. Allie Waddle, assistant principal for Emporia Middle School. Cheryl Lees, assistant principal for Emporia High. So they will join and be able to answer questions as well. So, Mr. Giffen.
So handbooks is a popular topic tonight. We've broken them up intentionally to help you absorb and digest things a little bit more easily. We always bring the certified handbooks in one agenda item and try to address those all together. There are several items I'm going to address that you'll find common in all the handbooks, not just these three, but also administrator handbook and classified handbook. So in the essence of time, I'm just going to kind of summarize those, and then the principals can speak to just the other substantial changes or unsubstantial changes to their respective handbooks as well. So we did include the hazing policy in each of the handbooks for our staff members. We added a section or just a paragraph on transporting students. We really don't encourage our staff members to transport students, especially in their own private vehicles. Obviously, if they're driving kids in a van to an event, that's a different story. Another piece of that particular paragraph included the fact that we're asking staff not to transport their own children in our district vehicle if they're responsible for taking a group to Topeka or something like that. There were a situation we had to address last year, and we just wanted to make sure that was clear for nothing more than liability and safety purposes. There were a couple of policies that were adopted recently that had the word discrimination in. We just took those references out. Our personal illness pool last year included maternity leave, so we just simply returned the personal illness pool language back to the way it was the previous year, with the word required in there to try and clarify some language that might have been unclear. We did add in the maternity and paternity leave language for each of the handbooks as well. Another section we added in that's new dealt with staff members who might sign up for professional development for especially out of town. If we've registered them, we've gotten hotel reservations, flights, and all of those things. We've run into some situations where people either chose it upon themselves to change those reservations or not attend at all. And it really put the district in a financial bind. So if there are those circumstances where employees are making those changes upon on their own, we're going to ask them to help with the cost of that. Obviously, there are extenuating circumstances, illness or death or something like that of a family member that we would certainly consider. But we wanted to make sure that we were addressing that for those that were causing some pretty big hardships for our groups that were planning things to go. The other substantial change in the certified handbooks was we adopted a policy recently that talked about challenged materials. And we just wanted to make sure that that was clear in each of the handbooks. So have Mr. Kirk address a couple of the elementary things, and then we'll work on through with those others.
Okay, so first one is page 4, attendance. We just felt with the challenges of fulfillment when absences occur and a limited number of substitute teachers, things like that, proves to be a significant challenge. And so we wanted to just add something in that really emphasized the importance of, how much we count on our staff to be there every day when it's possible. And that honestly, they are the most effective educators for our students. And so just trying to emphasize that and make sure that that's important. And then the only other one that I have is on page 22 of the elementary, the opt-out form. So that's involving the sexual education instruction that our nurses have been doing for several years now. We just updated the part where there's a previous policy said all forms are stored in the principal's office. Our nurses keep those forms if there's any opt-out forms in their office. So that was just kind of a wording change of location.
Good evening. For the middle school faculty handbook changes, on page 4, we just added some language and clarified the consequence and the process of handling after-school detentions, just standardizing that and being assigned through the office. On page 13, under communication with families, we added a statement about teachers making contact with and communicating with parents if there are concerns about student behavior, kind of like what was mentioned this evening, especially with those minor behaviors, making sure that it's communicated and we're bringing families in on those conversations. On page 18, we updated and added the language to describe our crisis drills. So we added that in there. It was not. Page 21, we clarified the use of our new e-hall pass tool for signing in and out instead of using our planners when excusing students from the classroom. So our e-hall pass will be replacing planners. And then on page 35, under tardies, we just added some descriptive language to describe those responsibilities in regards to student tardies and the processes that we use to make sure we have the data on that and can assign consequences or just keep track of that. It'll go through our attendance secretary in the office. That's all I have.
Good evening. At the high school level, we had 2 changes, one being on page 6, the chargeable leave. Our change just reflects the negotiated agreement. It's just getting in alignment with the other handbooks. The second change is on page 25, the DCF and law enforcement access to students on school premises. We just added the reference to the board policy JCAC. So that was just clarification of the board policy.
Questions might you have about any of those certified handbooks?
I don't have any.
I don't have any questions either, but I would point out, kind of to Jen's point earlier, there are some guidelines about student discipline in the handbooks already. So I don't know if that answers kind of what you were talking about earlier, but it's there. Yeah, I don't have any.
I don't think so.
If there aren't any, even though this is a first reading, it is up to the discretion of the board as to whether you would want to adopt those tonight. to save us from bringing it back a second time. A lot of times we'll do that upon the first reading if there are no other questions or clarifications or changes.
I know Jamie felt like she wanted to keep this as a first reading, so if we are all okay with that, okay, then
Do you know if she intends to ask her questions prior to next meeting then? Or do you think she intends to bring those up in the,
do not know.
okay. Just, it would be nice if they had a
Yes,
heads up since we
yes,
already did our first read
yes,
tonight.
I agree. I mean, she's normally pretty on top of it, so I don't know. I think we'll keep it as a first reading. Thanks, guys. So that brings us to item 7C, classified administrator and substitute teacher handbooks for 2023-24 school year. And we also had this as a first reading.
Yes, okay. Mr. Githam?
Okay, other than the changes I've spoken about already in the classified handbook, there really wasn't much language we needed to change. On page 6, there was a minor clarification on just the correct statute number that was listed there. And then on page 22, there was a misprint in a previous version. I don't know how it got changed from 59.5 to 55.5, but IRS guidelines actually require that to be 59.5. So we just changed that back in the classified handbook. As far as the substitute handbook, very minor changes there. We just changed names of building principals, administrators, or contact folks in those buildings, so the substitutes knew who to reach out to. And then the change of pay rate went from $9 an hour, which it was previously for subs. If they were doing work outside of a normal sub day, we raised that to what our base is for classified staff at the $15 an hour rate. And then finally, the administrator handbook changes. Again, everything we've spoken about earlier is noted in here. The only addition was on page 20. There was a paragraph added to the bullying section to really identify who a person might go to if they felt like there were bullying, harassment, or discriminatory types of situations. So we just added that in as well as relevant policies. Any questions about any of those handbooks? And same situation applies. If you want to keep it on, we'll bring it back for a second reading, or we could approve tonight.
How does everyone feel about this? We want to keep it as a first reading, or?
I'm okay with keeping it as a first reading.
Okay, okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, so then 7D, the athletic handbook for 2023-2024, also a first reading.
Mr. Martin is here for Emporia Middle School, and Cheryl Leeds, assistant principal at Emporia High School.
The changes that we have and are requesting are 5 in total. The first one is the high school athletic director at Junction City is changed to include unified bowling in the fall activities. There's some wording changes on page 15 when it comes to coach's decision on playing time and the amount of students who participate. Sometimes that changes the amount of play time. Wording on page 22, which better reflect coaching expectations, which are listed on that on page 22 pretty clearly, and then added the hazing policy on pages 35 and 36.
My only thing, I always lament that it's called a hazing policy when I always think it should be called an anti-hazing policy. But I do understand why it's called that.
Do you think this is something we should hold? I'm asking the board members in general for the next meeting. I think so too, just so everyone has input on it.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. Okay, that brings us to item 8A, board reports, the Rec Commission.
Yes, so on the 17th of this month, we had an exciting meeting of the Emporia Recreation Commission. It was really awesome. The Summerscape program has been going on. I think our highest number we had was 85. It's been a good week, a good summer for Summerscape. There are going to be some fall plans with the Rec Commission is, I think, in the process of connecting with ESU to kind of cooperate with sort of an esports program that's now become a really big thing, and I think that's something that's going to be geared more towards the middle school age students, the high school age students. There's some talk about a haunted house at the rec center in October for Halloween. You should all be there. That's where I'm going to be. And then the fitness room is in the process of getting the new flooring put in. You've heard me talk about the flooring of the fitness room several times. And this is how you know you've reached peak adulthood, when you're on public boards and you get excited about flooring, HVAC units, and roofs. But it's going to look really nice once that's finished. The rec center has done a lot of work on that. And we got an information about an IRS employee retention tax credit. So the rec center is going to actually have a substantial amount of money to be able to put towards whatever we decide to do. It's going to be an agenda item for the next meeting, but it is substantial. And so we may invest some of that, hold some of it for capital improvements, but we're pretty excited and blessed to have that to put it back in the community.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, Jeremy. And then, as I previously had mentioned, the four of us had the opportunity to go to the KSB Leadership Conference. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Dr. Harder, or I can. It doesn't matter. Okay. So Jamie Reaver and Casey and Dr. Harder and I went to Salina last week to go to the KSB Leadership Conference, which was a really great opportunity to connect with other board presidents and vice presidents and superintendents. So it was a great networking opportunity, and they also had a lot of great sessions as well. I went to one on policymaking, the legislative forecast for next year, and then one on teacher retention, which was really informational leading into tonight's agenda item.
I will just say that our district was the only district that had the president, vice president, board clerk, and superintendent there. So it's the first time that they have had this, but it was, and we were maybe close to being outnumbered by KSB representatives, but it was really good. We had some nice breakout sessions. The great thing about it being a small group is that we were able to more intimately talk about just some challenges and ideas from other districts that we might glean. We spent some time talking, hearing from the speaker from the Center of Creative Leadership. That was really helpful. We had some good ideas and just talking about that organizational and leadership and how do we pull everyone together and get everybody working toward the same goals. So it was really good. Casey, would you like to add anything?
Okay, and that brings us to item 9A, future board calendar dates. So our next time we will be together is August 9th for convocation at the high school, and then we have our board retreat and our board meeting that day. So August 9th will be a busy day for us. And then we have our next August meeting on the 23rd. Prior to our August 23rd meeting, we will also have another board retreat, and then we'll meet at 6:30 for our regular meeting. Okay. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, cast your votes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.